Good afternoon, I'm Shavy Joyce M. Termino and I'm going to report about Introduction. Food security is a global concern. In recent decades, demographic and economic growth have challenged the limits of economic, social, and ecological sustainability, giving rise to questions about food security at the global level. Despite technological advances that have modernized the conditions of production and distribution of food, hunger and malnutrition still threatens the health and well-being of millions of people around the world. Access to food is still perceived by many as a privilege rather than a basic human right. And it is estimated that about 35,000 people around the world die each day from hunger. An even larger number of people, particularly women, children, and the elderly, suffer from malnutrition. Far from disappearing, hunger and malnutrition are on the increase even in advanced industrialized countries like Canada, where each year an estimated of 2.5 million people depend on food banks. About 30 million people in the United States are reported to be unable to buy enough food to maintain good health. The continuing reality of hunger and the unsustainability of current practices, both locally and globally, make food security an essential concern. To achieve lasting self-reliance at the national and household levels, initiatives must be founded on the principles of economic feasibility, equality, broad participation, and the sustainable use of natural resources. In recent years, most of the research initiatives for food security have been focused on four key components of the FAO's definition. First is availability. Availability, providing sufficient supply of food for all the people at all times, has historically been a major challenge. Although technical and scientific innovations have made important contributions focused on quantity and economies of scale, little attention has been paid to the sustainability of such practices. Number two is accessibility. Accessibility, the equality of access to food, is a dimension of food security. Within and between societies, inequities have resulted in serious entitlement problems reflecting class, gender, ethnic, racial, and age differentials, as well as national and regional gaps in development. Most measures to provide emergency food aid have attempted to help the disadvantages that have limited success in overcoming the structural conditions that forsake such inequalities. Number three is acceptability. An essential ingredients in human health and well-being, food and food practices reflect the social and cultural diversity of humanity. Efforts to provide food without paying attention to the symbolic role of food in people's lives have failed to solve food security problems. This dimension of food security is also important in determining whether information and food system innovations will be accepted in a country given the social and ecological concerns of the citizens. Fourth is the adequacy. Food security also requires the adequate measures are in place at all levels of the food system to guarantee the sustainability of progress. So that is the four key components of the FAO definition. First is the availability, second is the accessibility, third is the acceptability, and fourth is the adequacy.
So, a number of global economy and ecological problems continue to limit the prospect of global food security. So, world per capita cereal production, 82% of less developed countries, for example, has been increasing only marginally in recent years. In fact, it has been on the decline in Sub-Saharan Africa and Latin America and the Caribbean. particularly in low-income countries struck by economic reforms, natural and other disasters of other factors. The population of this region is expected to more double by 2020. So next, regional and global economic crises and chronic problems of undevelopment make the situation particularly bad in the developing world. So for example, no higher than it was in 1960s, and the region has less weight in the global economy today than it did in the 1960s. Economic informalization clearly accompanies and economies disintegration, but insufficient purchasing power among the world's poorest 800 million people remains the primary obstacle to such strategies.
Multilateral agreement in trade and investment further threaten the availability and accessibility of food for large segment of the world population. There are many experts agree that the reduction in the world surpluses and the increase in the international prices are encouraged by the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade Pose, an immediate threat to region already suffering insecurity, and the duration of this threat are unknown. By the way, what is tariff and its purpose? Well, a tariff is a tax on imports, often known as duty or trade barrier. And the purpose of the tariff is which the government imposes to raise the cost of particular important is to limit or reduce the amount of that good imported to the country. Global prospects for improving food security are further threatened by environment limitation on production increases, even green revolution countries, and by growing poverty. In Asia, large share of population will soon without access to adequate food supplies. So despite the technical modernization of food and distribution, hunger and malnutrition is still undermined. The health and well-being of millions of people actually seems to be worsening, particularly among low-income residents. This lead Dr. Owe Wilbro of the European Commission in Brazil to recommend favoring production of more traditional food crops in rural areas and developing non-land using production in urban areas.
Food security and urban populations. Although the consequences can be visible, the causes and the scope of food security problems for urban population may not be apparent. From production to consumption, the food system comprises complex interrelated and interdependent parts like social and economic elements, agencies, processes, and structures. Their interdependent relationship requires a structure and systematic analysis focusing on global as well as local linkages. The rural, urban, and local global interrelationships make it possible to study urban food security issues in isolation. Yet, it is also clear that extraordinary urban growth in the 20th century and increasing threats to food security for millions of urban dwellers merits particular attention. The scope and urgency of the problems require analysis of food security questions for urban areas and new policies and practices to encourage the adoption of sustainable urban food systems. Food security has become an increasing concern of urban populations. We identify four major challenges to focus our analysis. First, urban centers have expanded enormously in population and in size. In the 20th century, urban growth has reached unprecedented levels in most parts of the world. In 3 recent decades alone, the urban population in developed countries doubled from 448 million in 1950 to 875 million in 1990. In the same period, the urban population in developing countries more than quintupled from 280 million to 1.6 billion. In 1990, 33% of the world's urban population was living in the city, with 1 million or more inhabitants. By the end of this century, six of the largest cities will be found in the developing world, having urban settlements approaching 30 million people will likely strain already inequalities. Urban expansion has converted a significant portion of green space and good quality, often scarce agricultural and land. It has already increased water and air pollution and created serious waste disposal problems. Also, zoning bylaws, speculative land markets, and soil and water contamination have created obstacles to effective local food systems and urban agriculture. A second challenge has been the unevenness of access to food. Historically, poverty has been predominantly a rural phenomenon. Yet, as the majority of the world's population moves to urban areas, we are seeing a reversal in a regional distribution of poverty. World Bank 1990 figures indicated that in 1988, about 25% of the poorest segments of the developing world were living in urban areas. The World Bank also estimated that by 2000, this will reach 50%. World Bank 1990. In developing countries, the ranks of the urban poor have swelled as a result of such factors as the continuous migration of the rural poor into the cities, the limited ability of the urban informal sector to absorb the unemployed, the limited employment opportunities in formal labor markets, negative impacts of the global economic crisis, and the austerity measures adopted to deal with foreign debt. In Eastern Europe and the industrial West, the situation is not much better. A decline in full-time, secure, well-paid employment. The result of economic downsizing, the dismantling of the welfare state and social programs, and the feminization of poverty have turned urban poverty in a truly global phenomenon. Most observers agree that the increase in poverty has been the biggest threat to food security. Unfortunately, most of the solutions have been limited to patchwork remedies such as food banks, food aid, and similar emergency responses.
The third challenging and fourth challenging. The third challenging is overcome the inability of existing market and service agency to respond to, to highly diverse social and cultural masco of urban population. The complexity of city, the diversity of their class, gender, ethnic, and demographic characteristics, and their corresponding need to access problem created new challenge in the attempt to ensure urban food security. The fourth challenging is the growing commodification of the agri-food system. The majority of people in urban population have very little understand of how their food is produced, transported, processed or distributed. Question can be raised about the long-term economic, ecological, and political sustainability of so-called success of the current food system, with its global division of labor, como, como field, como feed food economy, increasing original original specialization, industrial agriculture, and transcontinental network of distribution.
And this is my reports. Food banks and other community assistance programs should only be relied on as emergency measures rather than being institutionalized as permanent mechanisms for food access. Food banks often serve two goals: to assist low income consumers and to distribute surplus food. To reduce poverty and inequities in access, structural measures need to be undertaken to provide long-term security. At the same time, mechanisms for distribution of surplus food can be developed to respond to specific community needs without stigmatizing the poor. And then, Food Bank is a non-profit charitable organization that distribute food food to those who are difficulty purchasing enough to avoid hunger. And also the food banks is very important because can and should implement nutrition policies. The charitable food system is vital for food access for vulnerable people in nearly every community in the United States, and food banks are important in addressing community health disparities through the foods and related services that they provide. No single solution will solve the problem of food insecurity. What is needed is a list of choices and a commitment to the principle of food security listed above. The best recipe we can offer is to establish globally interlinked local food system that use diverse technical, social, and economic resources to improve the availability and accessibility of sustainability, produce and distribute culturally acceptable food. Reaching this goal requires unique local solutions, as well as global cooperation to solve common problems. Finally, the concept of food democracy was the central theme of the conference's keynote speaker, Them Lang, moving beyond the nation, that consumers act as rational beings who focus on their individual interest. The concept of food democracy or food citizenship recognized that consumers can identify the interest of others food workers, other consumers, future generations, and other species. As a citizens, we can participate in shaping the food system and the ways consumption of food in our communities express the values of family and culture. And given the complexity of the food chain and the limitation of a conference setting, it is practically impossible to include or even claim to do justice to all dimensions or urban food security questions. Our goals was to create a forum by inviting people who share similar concerns and a similar desire to achieve a sustainable food system. We accept and respect the diversity of opinions on this issue, and we do not claim to offer all the answers. While focusing on urban food system, we recognize that cities have evolved as hubs of economic and cultural life. Their success in terms of defense population is also the source of their vulnerability, and that their survival depends on the ways they relate to their local, regional, national, and global context.
Local food systems offer long-term sustainable solutions both for the environment and local and regional economic development. So, in order to do the world now and in the future, several key challenges need to be addressed, including population growth and climate change.
So, it helps to enhance the productivity and consecutively the production of food. It can assist in providing opportunities for income generation, and it generally provides improvement of nutritional advice through home economics programs and enhance the quality of rural life by way of community development. Cities need to encourage urban and peri-urban agriculture, aquaculture, food forestry, and animal husbandry, as well as safe waste recycling as elements of more self-reliant local food system initiatives. So, so when we say urban and peri-urban agriculture, it helps foods products, which producing food in areas nearby to cities shorten supply chains, which aids quality and cost, so that it develops countries and of agriculture to, to meet future needs, to promote and finance greater experiences in our cities as to enhance food. Cities and metropolitan regions need to give priority to the availability and accessibility of food and develop their own food security plans as part of their social and economic planning. Food policy councils should be formed to advise local governments and planners. So, food security is dependent upon three factors. These are availability, stability, and accessibility of food supplies. That we can need to give priority to the availability and accessibility of food and develop their own food security. That would be all. Thank you.